I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to Heritage Village's Speaking of History virtual series in partnership with St. Petersburg Press. My name is Monica Drake. I'm the operations manager of Heritage Village. And tonight's presentation is based on research done for the book, Where Have All the Mangoes Gone, by our presenter tonight, Sarah Jane Vatelot. Sarah Jane's book examines how building Tropicana Field in 1986 forever changed the fabric of downtown St. Petersburg and its African-American community. Sarah Jane is a project manager at Behar Petronitz Architecture in St. Petersburg and is pursuing her architecture degree at USF Tampa. Welcome, Sarah.
Hello, thank you for having me. Thank you to the St. Petersburg Group and Heritage Village for hosting this talk tonight. I will go ahead and share my screen. I'm actually no longer at USF, I graduated.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
One thing to note while Sarah's presenting too is if you have any questions while Sarah Jane is presenting, you can add your question to the chat box and we will have a Q&A at the end. Sarah Jane might also stop and answer along the way if she feels the need to do so. So if you have questions, just add it right to the chat box.
Okay. All right, so the book that I wrote is called Where Have All the Mangoes Gone? It actually started as a master's thesis in 2018, where I was invited to participate in a design charrette hosted by Feldman Equities, Bandy's Construction, and Rankerag Parks Architects, where they invited some of the students from USF to sort of brainstorm what could happen on the Tropicana Field site. And design charrettes like that are typically conducted to get sort of fresh input on a project, on a problem that's been thought of by people along the way and good solutions haven't come out yet. And so during this 2-day charrette, I really sort of was taken by the project and I decided to make it my master's thesis that year. And so as I started, this is the graphic here. This is the graphic here that compelled me into this research and this study because it became, it's a graphic that I put together for that charrette. And it became so clear to me that the Tropicana Field and site and the highways are a void in the urban fabric. And it was so striking to me that I decided to take on this project to investigate ways to patch that up. And also during that summer, HKS Architects had released their proposals. And they had 2 schemes, one with and one without a baseball stadium. And if you've been keeping up with the news today, all 7 developer proposals have been released for the Tropicana Field site. So this is very topical. And there was talk in the community that just there was something about that presentation that wasn't quite resonating. And when I reviewed, their presentation, it was complete. There was nothing really missing out of it, and overall not a bad scheme. But I think that there was a lack of sort of acknowledgement as to what the root of the issue really is and how to address it in a plan. And so here's some background. Obviously, when we do a project, we frame it. So here is St. Petersburg in Pinellas County. Pinellas County on the west coast of Florida, population 970,637. And the population of St. Petersburg, 263,255. On this plan here, I've marked Straub Park and Tropicana Field site, which we will discuss later as to why I pointed those things out. But here you can see that the Tropicana Field site is centrally located to the borders of St. Petersburg. And this is the site right here that we were provided, well, that HKS was provided to work with. And so I outlined sort of the parcel that all of this 86 acres encompasses. So I started the project with my due diligence of doing a field visit. And what I decided to do is, because of the historical context of the site, which I will get into, and sort of the problem that the highway creates in dividing North and South St. Pete, I decided to walk to the site. So I started at the Carter G. Woodson Museum of African American History on 22nd Street South and 9th Avenue South, which were called which gained the name of the Street of Music and the Avenue of Faith the Street of Music due to the Manhattan Casino, and the Avenue of Faith due to the presence of many churches along 9th Avenue South. And it was actually historically quite an important road in the neighborhood. And so I started at the museum and I walked north on 22nd Street South to access the site through the Pinellas Trail. So I've shown here images of my journey up to the site, noting that I did not encounter a single pedestrian. I was accompanied to the site with noises from the highway and industrial noises along the Warehouse Arts District, and it wasn't a particularly pleasant walk. So once I arrived to the site, I walked down Booker Creek. The parking lot it was a hot day in September, so I had no desire to venture into the parking lot as I could see the steam rising from the asphalt. So I walked down Booker Creek and noted the beautiful sort of underused topography of the site, and it was quite a pleasant walk along Booker Creek. And I did note some fish and turtles swimming by, and I thought that really in the way that it currently is, it's an absolute afterthought. And so another thing of note is that I saw no one there because it wasn't a game day. And when it's not a game day, it's not an occupied space. Then when I came down to 4th Avenue South right here, I noted the presence of a mango tree caught between a chain link fence and the highway. And that was a very evocative sight to me because by that time I had read the books by Rosalie Peck and John Wilson, St. Petersburg's Historic African American Neighborhoods and St. Petersburg's Historic 22nd Street South, in which they recount the oral history of Southside St. Petersburg from the perspective of people who lived it, and in a way that I think is, it's done with a voice that is really quite evocative. And so there is, I named the book Where Have All the Mangoes Gone because of Miss Rosalie Peck's poetry, which I will get to later. So then I came back. So once, actually I didn't address this, but once I passed the underpass and went back towards Campbell Park, the walk back to the Carter G. Woodson was quite pleasant. And I heard, bicycles, pedestrians along the way, children playing in Campbell Park, and it was quite lively and active. And I was struck just by how vibrant the neighborhood was to walk through. And so I decided that that would be the most reasonable point of access to the site was through 16th Street and not really through 22nd Street and the Pinellas Trail. So then when I arrived at the Carter G. Woodson, I went inside and I was invited to visit the Legacy Garden behind it, which was established in 2008. It was actually a project by Leadership St. Pete. And they had over 200 magnolia shipped from Georgia. There are 2,000 plants gracing this garden. And it was such a beautiful oasis on a hot summer day. And after a very hot walk. And so it was quite lovely to sit under the oak trees for a little bit. And I spoke to volunteer Lynette Hardy, who shared with me her story. And her grandfather was actually Chester James, who was the unofficial mayor of Methodist Town in the 1970s. And he was a fierce advocate for the residents of the area, which no longer exists the way it did. This is a map of St. Petersburg in 1947, before the division of the highway and before Tropicana Field. And the area that I've highlighted here was called the Gas Plant Neighborhood, which is the historic African American neighborhood that we'll be discussing here. And so you'll see it was called the Gas Plant District because of 2 gas cylinders on the site, which were lining the railroad right here. And so the railroad was historically, is really what gave birth to St. Petersburg as a city. And in 1888, the railroad was completed, and the people who put it together were African-American workers who had settled in these neighborhoods, which the historic neighborhoods are Peppertown, which is right here. It used to be east of 9th Street. In this portion of town, and you can kind of see when you look at a map of the city that it has sort of it still has a residential feel and grid to it, and that's sort of a vestige of that neighborhood that used to be, and that was cleared out by the 1940s. Up here, up 9th Street was Methodist Town. And Methodist Town is the only African-American neighborhood that was permitted to remain north of Central Avenue. It was understood that that was a boundary not to cross. And more so the railroad tracks were a boundary not to cross, which is, across our nation and probably throughout history, railroad tracks are known as a divider of race and class. And that was no different here in St. Petersburg. And so what you see here from this map is that you have a connected city. Even though this map exists during a time of segregation and of deep segregation in our city, you still have a continuity that exists between all of these neighborhoods that is actually very important to the vitality of communities and of a city. So I went on a quest to understand what this gas plant neighborhood really was and what it meant to its occupants. And so this is a graphic that I generated for myself and to create a built dimension, right, to this two-dimensional map that we look at, trying to take some of these historical images and to the best of my ability, placing them on the map from the perspective that you would have seen them. And so in that way, trying to humanize the sites and to convey that, yes, it's an empty lot of land now, but it used to be so much more. Right, the gas plant neighborhood was, for all purposes, the downtown for African Americans who were not permitted to sit on the green benches in downtown St. Petersburg. And it was a place where there were over 500 households, there were churches, there was the first African American school called Davis Elementary. There were businesses that had been handed down from generation to generation. There was a great graveyards, and I think we heard today people mentioning on that press conference that Rick Reisman did, where are the graveyards? And I had read up that when the highway was being built, there were some remains that had been discovered from an old graveyard that was moved quite some time before the highway came along. And so there is a lot of history in this site, and it's meaningful to people because it really only just disappeared 40 years ago, right? And 40 years ago in a scheme of time is not very long. And so for a person like me who had moved to St. Petersburg in 1997 as a high school student, and to me, the Tropicana Field was always there, and I never questioned why it was there or why it would be a problem. And so many years later, to sort of encounter this history that I was not familiar with, and it explained a lot of things to me. So here is the root of the problem, right? These are maps. They're called redlining maps for those of you who are not familiar. And these were maps that were put together in the 1930s by the HOLC, which is the Homeowners Loan Corporation, and they were used for many purposes. But one of its purposes was, many would argue, for housing discrimination. So here, what you can see are the three historic African-American neighborhoods that were settled in the late 1800s. This is Methodist Town over here. This is Peppertown. And this right here is the gas plant neighborhood. And it extends over here because this was all continuous before. It only became sort of a separate neighborhood when the highway severed it from the rest of it. And so it's a little hard to see because these are low resolution images that we got, but these are the records which state why these red areas were considered to be hazardous. And here the presence, they describe them as South Side Negro sections. And so this redlining led to the city's proposed segregation project. So here it's a little hard to see compared to the previous map where we're located, but if you will, this right here is the gas plant neighborhood. And so this line here represents the legal description that was provided by the city as a location for African Americans who they deemed were too close to downtown proximity. And keep in mind, this happened after the Great Depression. And so a city like St. Petersburg that was founded on tourism was trying to recover economically. And so this was part of their initiative to to clean up their city, is the way they looked at it, by moving African American visibility away from their downtown. And so this right here is the legal description. This is 16th Street right here. So they moved them over one block. This was never fully realized. This is not something that they actually were able to do, but just the fact that this document existed and that it was written in the city charter is shocking, to say the least. And it's really speaks to a legacy that we have to deal with in this city, of a very difficult past that we've now inherited and that now exists in the form of Tropicana Field as a reminder. And so, and by the way, even though, you know, the United States has the South has a difficult history with segregation and with violence against African Americans, St. Petersburg was one of the only cities in the country to have it in their city charter that there shall be segregation. Most other places it was understood or enforced by people, but not by law. So that led me to generate this graphic, which is the cover of the book. And what it is a compilation of the things that I showed you. So here we have the Tropicana Field site, Peppertown, and Methodist Town. And those are the outlines that were provided by the redlining maps right here. And then I've overlaid it with the segregation, the St. Petersburg proposed segregation map over here. And what I did is I tried to locate the businesses, the churches, and the places that were important on the gas plant site, and as pins on the map. And then I tried to track the relocation of some of these areas. Now, I don't know that I was incredibly thorough because I didn't have access to all of that is available out there, nor that was I able to speak to everybody that I came across, because I was limited on time here, but I did locate a lot of the businesses, and I can read off to you some of the businesses that are located on this map. There was the Harlem Theater, the Harlem Cafe, the Citizens Lunch Counter, Cozy Corner Nightclub, Cat's Groceries, Bill's Ron Rico Club, Central Life Insurance, Selena's Beauty Salon, Kilgore's Drugs, Jay's Pharmacy, Eddie's Shoe Shine, Lawrence Clark Confections, Hicks Service Station, B&B Luncheonette, Morton's Restaurant, and Newkirk's Steakhouse. I also put the churches on there, and the churches, all 13 of the churches that were on the site, had a presence on the site at the time, were provided land and relocated. So you see that the lines here, the thread shows you the site of relocation. And so only one business that I find that was relocated, and that is the Lakeview Market. And so I went to speak with Miss Daisy Swinton, who runs the Lakeview Market, and she had a shop on the Tropicana Field site in the 1970s, and she lived across the street from where she worked. And she told me that that dome took her home. And there are so many stories like that out there. And I think what was compelling to me were the limited amount of interviews that I was able to conduct. People's memories of that place, even though it was considered to be blight by outsiders, it was much more than that. It was a community, and people had stories and they had livelihoods. And the raising of the gas plant neighborhood completely removed their presence from that land that they had an attachment to, and that community was gone. And so she related to me that the greatest loss that people suffered, though, was economic, because the elderly couldn't get around, and once this sort of downtown center disappeared, then there was nowhere really to shop, because a lot of the small businesses, and also this happening in the 1980s, is when there was sort of a decline of the small business that was slowly being replaced by big box stores. So this was something that was happening across the board. But the disappearance of this neighborhood was very dramatic in the area and has caused a lot of economic suffering. 22nd Street South, illustrated here with the Manhattan Casino and just adjacent to Jordan Park, in its heyday had over 100 Black-owned businesses. It really was the center, the business center of the African-American neighborhood. And today it is quite a shadow of its past. But I think what is notable here as well is you see the highway slicing through this community right here and just creating endless dead-end streets. And I'd like to point out too that the highway is porous north of 4th Avenue South up to about, I think it's 9th Avenue North, if I'm not mistaken. So there's east to west movement under the highway is facilitated. And once you reach the trop over here, it becomes a wall with few points of crossing. And really just standing in Campbell Park is a very impressive berm in front of you. And it sends a very wrong message. And so that is the condition of the highway here, cutting off the Manhattan Casino, which was the heart of 22nd Street South. It was known as the home of Happy Feet, where Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, and many other great artists performed. And it was a place for community bonding and for, to forget about your worries in a difficult context like this one. So right here, you can't help but think that there was some intention to the way that this highway was routed to cut off all of this neighborhood from what was important to them. Gibbs High School was also previously directly connected through 9th Avenue South, the Avenue of Faith over here. There was a direct connection that the marching band would take from Gibbs High School all the way to Campbell Park. And you see that here, this is completely decimated. On this map, also the screws represent the churches in the area, and I think there's some symbolism there that the churches are holding the layers of history together because they provided a stable and empowering social experience. More than any other institution, they helped newcomers to find homes and jobs, and they fed and clothed the poor when other institutions would not. And they also combined their influence to speak to the white establishment downtown. So there were very important social centers, and I wanted them represented in this map to show sort of their presence, and that even though the community was decimated from an economic perspective, the faith remains strong and the bonds remain strong as well. So what do we need to do here? And so I thought, in light of this difficult history that we've discussed, I tried to propose some solutions. So I did some precedent research on urban plazas as urban catalysts, and looked into the impact that the introduction of an urban plaza had in other contexts. And here. So our existing urban plaza in St. Petersburg, we don't have one, right? But what we use as an urban plaza is Straub Park. And so here I've shown Straub Park on the edge of the water, and I've also denoted that Tropicana Field is much more centrally located and easier to access. And Straub Park, as its name indicates, is a park and it's not a plaza. And so it's really not intended to be used the way that we are using it. And the fact that it's on the edge of the city also makes it more difficult to access for a lot more people. So the first plaza, which is the most beautiful of them all that I looked at, is the Piazza del Campo in Siena, Italy. And the whole city is built around this urban plaza. And so it's quite beautifully framed with architecture and very active uses. And it's referred to as an urban beach because of the way that people sit on the terrace right there. It kind of looks like a beach, right? And so people go there. They don't go there to see the water as you would in the beach. They don't go there to see nature. They go there to see other people, and they go there to experience the architecture and the liveliness of the city. The programming around the piazza is very successful. There is mixed use of retail, restaurants, people live there, there are civic buildings there, and it really keeps the plaza active at all times of the night and all times of day and night. And what that does is that it creates a sense of security. While a park is a typology that is typically not viewed as safe after hours because there are no eyes on it, a plaza would provide vitality to the area and also provide eyes on the area for people to look out for each other. So Portsmouth Square Oh, also, I didn't mention that what I did is I outlined the plaza and then I showed its octopus. And what the octopus is the, it's sort of a successful plaza reaches its tentacles into the surrounding city fabric. And so what you see happening here is that you have access to this plaza from all parts of the city. And it just, all these roads sort of lead you to this place, this communal space. So this is the most graceful example that you're going to see here is Piazza del Campo in Siena, Italy, because it is quite an example. So Portsmouth Square is a different type of example. The reason I selected it is because it actually was the city center at its inception in when San Francisco was known as, let me see, was called Yerba Buena. And it was turned into a parking lot in the 1960s and was redesigned as a public plaza in the 1990s. So this is a great example of a place that was very underused, that was turned into a parking lot, that was something significant before, and that has now been revitalized and is now considered the heart of Chinatown in San Francisco. So you'll see here that the grid of the city is very tight because of the density of San Francisco. So it's quite a different context than what we have. But what you see is a park that is well programmed, a plaza that is well programmed, that has many activities for its community to enjoy, and has really become a place of bonding for the community. Campus Martius in Detroit, Michigan. That was another interesting example because as we know, well, this is one of the great examples of urban regeneration in the US. When it opened in 2004, people started coming back downtown in downtown Detroit for concerts, outdoor movies, and ever-changing flower gardens, dates at the park, cafes, or simply to sit there and relax. And what had been happening up to that point was that there was sort of an exodus away from downtown Detroit, and a lot of these buildings remained unoccupied. And so just putting that park there created an attraction and started bringing businesses back to downtown Detroit. Market Square in Pittsburgh is another good example. This one is more of a European style plaza, and you'll find a lot of similarities in the Siena project plaza. Excuse me, the plaza in Siena, in the way that it's framed, and it's more of they have markets there, they have residences, and those are very expensive and pricey places to live. Also, that's something that I will acknowledge, is that some of these places have ended up gentrifying the area, which is something that we don't want to happen here. But there are ways around that. Discovery Green in Houston, Texas, I think its relevance to the project is that it has a convention center on it, and it's the convention center that really activated this park. So this is more of a park rather than a plaza. But what it does very well is that it has a lot of programming that attracts people from the area to downtown Houston, and it makes it a much more walkable area, whereas Houston is not known for its walkability. Washington Square Park is a great example of a plaza or park setting rejuvenating a neighborhood. The population of this neighborhood over the Rhine dramatically decreased during Prohibition as residents lost their jobs and relocated to the suburbs. And so a once prosperous neighborhood quickly became known as one of the most crime-ridden areas in Cincinnati. And so, you know, the thinking was that even though when the city tried to turn this around, they said every neighborhood needs a center. And so they went ahead and rejuvenated the park and put it in place, and it became a great success, and people really use it. And the unique thing about this project is that the city has put in place, it is really being conscious of the fact that this park can cause gentrification in the areas, and they're trying to keep people in place. So they are actively, you know, there's design and policy that go hand in hand here to make this work, because design alone can't really solve a problem. You need design with thoughtful policy and thoughtful thinking behind it. And finally, this one is a difficult name to pronounce, but I think I got it now. It's Chongchen Stream Park in Seoul, South Korea. What's fascinating about this one is that this used to be a river or a stream, I suppose. It used to be a stream that connected these two neighborhoods. And what year did this happen? In 1968, an elevated highway was built directly over the stream, which led it to almost dry up. And so it completely divided these north and south neighborhoods from each other. And so the restoration work, the stream was opened back up to the public in 2005. And I think the poetry in this story is that it was the same contractor that had covered it up with a highway that came back and fixed it and put a park there. And so, this sort of reminded me of the highway in the Tropicana Field context, and also to the Booker Creek, the potential that Booker Creek has as currently a very underused feature to become the center of the area, and very beautiful in the way that it begins to be in Roser Park, just a half mile down the stream. And so, this is a beautiful example of how a barrier can become a connector. So this is our figure ground for Tropicana Field, and here is our big void that we are dealing with again. So I I did some urban analysis of the site to try to figure out and these are comparative studies between Straub Park and Tropicana Field as city centers. Okay. So the first one is the demographics and mean household income. And so what I did here is that I did a 1 mile radius around the Tropicana Field site and a 1 mile radius around Straub Park to compare sort of the demographics and the mean household income, to make a statement that if Straub Park as a city center, the way we are using it right now, really is the 1 mile radius around it is 86% white, 8% African American, and 5.5% other. Whereas the 1 mile radius around Tropicana Field site is 42% white, 52% African American, and 5.7% other. Here we can see that the radius around Tropicana Field site, it's much closer to our actual St. Petersburg demographics, which is 69% white, 23.5% African American, and 7.5% other. So this, if putting a city center and urban plaza on this site makes sense from an accessibility point of view, and to make it accessible to more people. I also looked at the mean household income as well, and the Tropicana 1 mile radius is much closer to the overall St. Petersburg income, which is 43,000, and these are based on 2016 census estimates. And then the mean household income around Straub Park is 76,000. So there's quite a stark difference here between accessibility within walkable distance to Straub Park and to the Tropicana Field site. So here I outlined the districts and the main streets. In yellow, we have arts districts right here that sort of wrap around the site. And then in green, I'm showing districts, neighborhoods with historic designations, and pointing out that, the south side, the neighborhoods in Southside St. Pete don't have historic designations because the 3 historic neighborhoods were demolished in the 1940s, in the 1970s, and in the 1980s. So there is no, other than the Deuces, which is really sort of the historic corridor there that we have, but it doesn't have a historic designation. No, I think it does now, actually. So yes, the Deuces has a historic designation. That's it. So here, again, I also pointed out the Florida Main Streets, which exist. And Florida Main Streets is a program where streets can, these corridors get funding for revitalization efforts. So the Deuces has qualified as a Florida Main Street, which is helping its redevelopment currently. First Avenue South, Central Avenue, and First Avenue North are all Florida Main Streets. And so I was proposing that 16th Street South become a Florida Main Street because it had a lot of small businesses there in the past that are no longer there, and it would really help to connect this portion of the South Side neighborhoods to the downtown area. That would be your main corridor to do so, right in the heart of the neighborhood. These are the non-residential uses and access arteries. To make this quick, basically, it is way easier to get to Tropicana Field than it is to Straub Park downtown. You see that the fact that it's an edge condition makes it much more difficult to access and leads to congestion when there are special events. Whereas here, even though the highway bypasses the Tropicana Field site and these neighborhoods currently as is, it'd be wonderful if 175 was removed, and it's actually currently, there are studies being conducted at the FDOT. So there is hope that 175 may be the first highway in Florida's history to be removed. And there are many good reasons for that to happen. But either way, here, accessibility to Tropicana Field site for large events and for community gathering events from all over St. Pete, much easier on this site than at Straub Park, where we currently hold our city events and markets. This is the public transit and walkability, and what you'll see here is that we have a good framework in place for alternative transportation uses. There are bus routes, biking trails, trolleys, and bike share. Now we have scooters. That's new since this graphic was put together a couple years ago. But we see here that St. Petersburg has a lot of work to do with its public transportation to make it more accessible to people and more desirable to ride. But we have a good framework in place to make that happen and to connect, these neighborhoods together. So what I find most interesting about this graphic is the walkability cloud here. It comes from walkscore.com, and it's these are the only areas in St. Petersburg that are considered a walkability score over 70. And so it's 100 downtown, and that's why it's a little brighter here, because basically it means that you can get all of your errands done without a car, is what that means. And interestingly, Southside St. Pete right here, also known as Midtown too, but these areas are also score 70 and above for walkability, which indicates that a lot of people do walk in these areas. But you'll see that there's a big looming void here in the middle of this walkability cloud, and that is Tropicana Field. So ultimately, comparing and contrasting these two sites is not the goal, the end goal. The end goal is to connect them. And so my proposal is to connect Straub Park, which is for all intents and purposes, the heart of downtown, to the Tropicana Field redeveloped site, which will be for all intents and purposes, the heart of the city. Here I've mapped the small and locally owned business shops and businesses right along Beach Drive and along Central Avenue. And what that points out is the city's storefront corridor preservation right here on Beach Drive and Central Avenue. And so they have rules in place where you have to keep the storefronts small in order to keep small businesses there, to make those spaces more accessible and affordable to small businesses. And that's why you don't see big chain restaurants or businesses along these roads right here. And so what I would offer is that we need to extend this to the Tropicana Field site as a way to honor the businesses that were there before and that were replaced, and buy 6,000 parking spaces and a baseball stadium. And if we could really focus on putting a lot of small storefronts, it would increase affordability, because we know that we have an affordability crisis in this city, and that a lot of these places along Central are becoming less and less affordable. So the focus here should be to provide a lot of space for people to have their businesses and create livelihoods on the site, and reconnect them to 16th Street. One must always maintain their connection to the past and yet ceaselessly pull away from it. I won't spend too much time on my proposal because I think it was really just a thought exercise on my part, but I built a 7-foot long model of the city, in which I placed an insert of my proposal for what should happen on the Tropicana Field site, which is not one of the ones that are out there as of today. This proposal did not make it there. But this project has been well received, and the RFP language that was released to developers actually had this book, Where Have All the Mangoes Gone, as reference material. So that was a really great honor to have been listed on there, along with these other publications that they had to look to. And so I think in building the city, it helped me to understand the fabric of the city and really kind of try to take a pass at infilling that void. And so that all of these buildings right there fit right into where the Tropicana Field site is, with one building and 6,000 parking spaces. The reason I chose to name the proposal Sugar Hill is that that's something that I meant to touch on earlier, but is that the gas plant district was a name that was given to the neighborhood by the city because their interest in the site were the gas cylinders that provided the city with their supply of gas, right? And I think in renaming that the gas plant today, I think is a little disingenuous in the way that, in my opinion, right? Because what we're trying to bring back is not the gas plant that polluted Booker Creek and probably caused health problems to the people who lived on the site. What we're bringing back are the people who were displaced and who were misled into believing that their neighborhood was going to be revitalized and they would be invited to return. Because in 1979, the city released the gas plant redevelopment plan, in which they promised a modern day industrial park, affordable housing, and 6.5 million worth of income generated by the end of the 1980s. And clearly that didn't happen, right? And so they went through, they captured the properties by eminent domain, and then people were not invited to come back because in 1986 the city council voted to put a baseball stadium there instead of the redevelopment that had been promised to people when they sold their homes. And so bringing back the name of Sugar Hill was one of the neighborhoods within the gas plant neighborhood, and is the one that is the most poetically described in the literature. And I will read you a few of those quotes here. Sugar Hill was probably named for its counterpart in New York City's Harlem, and it was located north of Campbell Park on the southern edge of the gas plant neighborhood where 175 currently resides. So Sugar Hill was right here, and it was the very first part of the gas plant neighborhood to be demolished. And so it was a neighborhood within a neighborhood, and its few gracious dwellings represented aspiration and attainment. In majestic stone mansions, stately brick dwellings, and well-kept bungalows lived the elite society of St. Petersburg's influential Black families, and the area was the pride of St. Petersburg's African-American population. On that paved and lighted roadway lived doctors, funeral directors, and educators. They served as role models for children and even younger adults striving to make their way, who often lived in lesser circumstances just a short walk away, in enclaves such as Little Egypt, 40 Quarters, and the Hollow. The residents of the area recall it fondly, rising as a sweet vision of success. For the rest of the Black community, Fifth Avenue South, without a doubt, stood as an oasis of hope for the less fortunate citizens stranded in an apparently endless desert of race-based segregation. Sugar Hill was part of a network. It was part of what could be considered a mixed income neighborhood within a racially segregated city. So I chose to name it Sugar Hill because I felt that was what we want to remember, right? We don't want to remember that the city stockade was there, where African Americans were jailed, sometimes for looking at someone the wrong way or unjustly. And what we want to remember is what made this a beautiful place and what made it a place for people to live and to aspire to live, So even though they were just adjacent to neighborhoods that were a little, that were less well kept, this was still a beacon for people to look to in less fortunate circumstances. And I think that that's what this neighborhood should be. It should be a beacon of inclusivity and a way for the city to say, we broke our promises in the past, but now we're going to reverse this, and we're going to present you with something that really connects the city. So this was my proposed master plan. And so what I did is I created a reservoir on Booker Creek and sort of this, this civic space with museums. There were, I won't go into too much detail on the proposal, but this was basically my pass at creating little neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods that were mixed use, that had retail on the bottom. I can go there. See, so here I created my octopus, right, where you see there's the public plaza that's connected in several directions to the city and reaching out like tentacles into the city fabric. And so here, this is truly a mixed use neighborhood, which is what I believe and everybody believes the area needs, right? We need jobs, we need places to live, affordable places to live, and we need vitality in the area. And so just as an aside, I was able to fit in what would amount to about 7,750 spaces within all of this, parking spaces within all of this density, which goes to show just how much of a waste of space surface parking lots can be. We can fit much more parking in there than what is currently being used. So I brought in the concept of an urban beach, and this is a rendering which shows a constructed water feature at the plaza, sort of connecting the plaza with people with water, because water is evocative of memory, and so it's a place to reflect and remember. And this is the urban beach right here, just sort of diagrammatically pointing out the land bridge also that connects back to Campbell Park. And so the land bridge sort of brings you into this city plaza environment where there's stepped seating and places for all types, just flexible and adaptable events to take place. And that is a section of the site. I had suggested that maybe because of the topography, we could nestle parking underneath, just how they do up north, but the water table's a little high, so you never know. And so the mixed income blocks, that was one of the features that I thought were important, is that I think that we need to reconsider the way we do affordable housing, and that affordable housing doesn't have to be a stigma. It doesn't have to be an edifice that is associated with poverty. If we do, like in other countries do this quite well, they do mixed income housing, where there are units that are indistinguishable one from the other from the outside, so that you may have the same address as somebody that you wouldn't typically be a neighbor with. But what neighbors do is that they help each other. And so having mixed income blocks and mixed income buildings in the heart of the city, where people were previously told that they didn't belong and they were meant to leave, I think is a warranted gesture at unity and at helping to uplift people and on the site. This was just a quick thought exercise of what a block could look like, and talking about, speaking of community at different scales. So this was community at the scale of a block. And again, I didn't really pay attention so much to the buildings as I did to the public realm that the buildings framed and created. And that's a street section where I showed here basically keeping in character with the Beach Drive in Central Avenue, where we have cars sort of parked on street parking, providing a buffer between traffic and the pedestrian experience. And also a great concept that if our building footprints retreat, then the buildings provide shade, and they also provide protection from the rain, because oftentimes if we go out for a walk, we'll get caught in the rain, and that's not very pleasant. So if our architecture could accommodate those moments, and we know there are many, especially during the summer, where you get caught off guard, that would be very responsive to its environment. So I will close by reading a passage from St. Petersburg's African American Neighborhoods, because this is the chapter in that book that inspired me to do this entire project. Miss Rosalie Peck wondered in her last chapter, where have all the mangoes gone? Everywhere were wonderful fruit-bearing trees that seemed to belong to no one and to everyone. It was a time when Southside children enjoyed access to an endless abundance of hunger-chasing, gut-filling, taste bud satisfying fruit from trees of unlimited kindness. Merciful shade-bearing trees sagged heavy with guavas, avocados, oranges, grapefruit, tangerines, and lemons, always present for the picking. Positive role models of old were recalled as being as plentiful as fruit-bearing trees. Revered in memory are parents, relatives, principals, teachers, coaches, preachers, friends, neighbors, professionals in multiple fields, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail. St. Petersburg today is nearly bereft of mangoes and other cherished fruit trees from neighborhood yards, but the city is still wealthy with a continuing supply of the soul-sustaining fruit of the human spirit. Thank you. I'll review questions now if there are any. Let me see.
Sarah, as we're waiting for people to put some questions in the chat box, I just want to say what a beautiful vision that is for the city of St. Petersburg. It, reminds me of a book I just recently read called The Visions of Eden, where they talk about urban developer John Nolan's vision for a city beautiful, and they were going to extend it to a county beautiful back in the 1920s, where John Nolan wanted to create these beautiful green spaces connected by boulevards. And what a wonderful place this would have been if that vision would have been, achieved. Unfortunately, it was shot down by some of the commission that were pretty much in the pocket of people who were sitting on road lobbyists and other concrete businessmen who were not interested in these park spaces that would have really been those public centers like you're talking about. And leading into that somewhat, the question that pops up in my mind as I'm looking at this wonderful vision of downtown St. Petersburg that you have is not only kind of that city beautiful ideal being realized, but the kind of environmental justice that will go along with healing and repairing that plot of land that is just nothing but concrete right now.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you bring up the City Beautiful movement, because that's actually what the basis that St. Petersburg was founded on. The City Beautiful movement was a reaction to the squalid conditions that occurred in cities as a reaction to the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. And so since St. Petersburg was founded in the early 1900s, it was a decision that was made by the founders of the city. There were two warring factions, sort of people who wanted it to be privatized waterfront and to maximize profit, and others who fought for it to be parks. And that's why we have 7 miles of parks downtown, because of the City Beautiful movement. So we were founded on that principle, and I think it's an important principle to maintain and to keep up. It's definitely, St. Petersburg has a lot to offer, and I think it's wonderful that we have people in the city who are working hard to keep it a walkable city, and they've put a lot of thought into their land development regulations to maintain sort of that scale that feels like St. Pete. And it's really a great place to be, and it's a great place to be growing right now. And I think the growth that we're experiencing, it's a little unsettling when you look at all of the expensive condos that are going up downtown, but I really think this is an opportunity for us to say, we can do better on this site.
I do hope you're right on that. So let's go to the chat box. There are a few questions that have come in. Let's see here. I know originally Raymond had a question about kind of the division between race and class, north and south of the railroad corridor. And his question was, is there always a divider of race in most cities because of the workers who created said railroads, or is it because it's not aesthetically pleasing to live near the tracks?
Right, and I think I don't know the answer to that necessarily for every city, but I think that you'll find that there are sayings, right, in our culture with living south of the railroad or north of the railroad, right, where it's sort of an understood divider. And it could be because it's difficult to traverse. It's not safe to traverse. And so it actually acts as a wall. I think what we've done well in St. Petersburg is that we've removed the tracks and created a bike trail out of the tracks, and it was part of the Tracks to Trails program that the city enacted. Now I think we can go even a step further and go from bike trail to really think it should stay bike trail in most areas, but when it enters downtown, I think it could really become more of a pedestrian connector. Especially in the Warehouse Arts District. And so my experience walking north on 22nd Street and walking down the trail wasn't particularly pleasant. There were it didn't feel safe, right? Because there were no eyes on it. And that's a point that I had made with, eyes on the street. And there's been a lot written about, in the life and death of the great American city, which is a must-read book if you're reading about urban planning. They speak of the author speaks of the choreography, the street choreography, the sidewalk ballet is what she calls it, right? Is that you have people in a vibrant city that is a neighborhood that feels like a home. You have people every morning that leave to go to work. You have the shops that are opening up. The baker downstairs might be setting up a shop at the same time every day. And you if you were to sit there and look at the life that happens every day, you see the same movements every day. And so it's a choreography, right? And as architects and planners, we can create the framework for that choreography to take place. And it can be a good one or a bad one, right? But if we put all of those design elements in place, then we can invite good stories to be written in the city and good dances and choreographies to take place.
Yeah, I love that. Novelty is really the spice of life. So when you have all of those elements together, it really does feel like you're in a community. There's something going on. You feel like you're in a space where it's thriving.
Yeah.
Let's see
and
here.
To finish that thought, interestingly, it's when you have sort of all of the housing is higher income, say, well, people who are higher income tend to work long hours, not be there all the time, and they don't have eyes on the streets. But if you have a variety of people that are from all walks of life that live in an area, then you have people there at all times of day, and you have people looking at the street. And what was noted in this case study is that the people who had their eyes on the street, who were there during the daytime, were the ones that were keeping the neighborhood safe, because when things would happen that weren't quite right on the street, they knew the choreography, they knew the sidewalk ballet. When something looked a little off, they would be there to realize it and to say something or intervene.
Yeah, it's almost as if it is the less kind of paranoid panopticon, right? You have people watching people, but in a good way. It's
right.
Keeping track of the city, avoiding that kind of broken window effect that just goes on if you don't have that choreography. And I love the way you say that. That's just so wonderful. Next question comes from Sue. She's wondering if you think that any of the proposals moving forward share a similar vision to yours.
Well, I would invite you to go on the city website, the 7 proposals. So an RFP was issued in July by the city, and it's a request for proposals inviting developers that if they want to develop these 86 acres, they have to meet all of this criteria in the RFP. And so they were due on January 15th, and the city released them publicly this afternoon at 4 p.m. So this was nice timing for my presentation, right? But yes, I actually was invited to be on one of the teams. So you will find that when you review the RFPs, you will see me on one of the teams. And I think, thank you. It's been quite a journey. And I think, I chose to be on this team because I really felt like their philosophy and the way they were looking at it resonated with the way that I was looking at it. And what I find important And so I decided to join this team and see, you know, if I could be a part of this process, even more so than I have been up till now. So I would encourage all of you to go and check them out on the website. There's some pretty impressive work there.
Fantastic. I can't wait to see that. Raymond has another question. He's wanting to know, are there current plans in place by the city to accommodate mixed income housing?
Yes, so in the RFP that was released in July, that was actually one of the requirements, is that affordable housing be considered and mixed income housing be considered as well. So the developers are invited to propose their vision of what that would be, and the city gets to decide what they think works best. But affordable housing is an important part of the plan. And you will see it in all 7 of the proposals. I haven't read through all of them yet because it was only 3 hours ago. So they're a little hefty too. So it'll make for some good reading over the next few days. But all of them include that to a certain degree because it was required by the city.
Another question coming out. What was the reason behind an urban beach as an architect?
Right, so this project was a little outside of my comfort zone because it was more of an urban planning exercise, and that was a challenge that I had taken on to myself, not having much experience with planning an entire neighborhood. But so as a school exercise, I found it interesting, and I learned a lot from it. And I think the urban beach, so when we're designing a neighborhood, what we're really designing is the space in between the buildings, right? Because each building will have their use, it will have an architect that designs it, and it can contain what it will contain. And the program is important to the entirety of the neighborhood. However, when you're designing the space in between, you're designing the public space, and that's the space where everyone is invited to be in, and everyone can experience that space as a community. And so the focus of the urban beach, I thought there was a bit of a poetry to that. And what the rationale that I came up with too is that, so St. Petersburg is known for its beaches and it sort of thrives on its edges, right? And so, but the thing is about St. Pete that most of its people live in the heart of the city, which is in the center. And so we don't experience beach every day. At least I don't. Like, I go to work, I live in the middle of St. Petersburg. I go to the beach probably less than some people who don't live near the beach. And I'm not representative of everyone, obviously, but so I think the idea of the urban beach was a place for, rather than going to the beach, and when you're at the beach, you're really in a context experiencing the vastness of this water around you and the sand, and it's really just, you're there to experience that. But the urban beach is a place where you go to experience other people and you go to experience community, and really to become the heart of the city was the idea behind urban beach.
You know, I find that just fantastic, because something as wonderful as the architecture in that Italian city can be as awe-inspiring probably as the Gulf of Mexico, or, you know, a beautiful pristine lake. So there's certainly something to be said for the urban beach. I love that concept, and that's the first time I've ever heard of that. So I'm glad you were introduced to the urban beach.
I mean, I'm a little biased because that's my thing, right? But I think architecture has the ability to inspire, right? To inspire and to in awe in us, and to lead us to lives better lived. And even though, you know, architects sort of choreograph the built environment that's around you, and oftentimes you don't think too much about it, but every move is intentional. And so the way you feel in a space, it has actually been thought out pretty well by someone else, you know, and it's sort of guiding your everyday life. And sometimes you'll feel uncomfortable, and you won't quite know why. And it could be that space was not designed in a way that would make you feel comfortable. And that was one of the questions that I asked people in interviews, is sort of, do you know could you tell me what kind of space you feel comfortable in? And it's a lot more difficult to pinpoint. But then when you turn the question around and you say, what kind of space do you feel uncomfortable in? Then you'll get a lot of answers, because people will understand what's not making them comfortable. But when they are comfortable, they're not taking note of it. And that's the idea, right?
Yes, a good plan always goes unnoticed because there's nothing to complain about.
Right. Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah Jane. I really appreciate it. That was a great presentation. I was just captivated by, everything that you were saying. It's so interesting to learn some of the research that you've uncovered here about St. Petersburg and the Gaslight District. Where Have All the Mangoes Gone is available for anybody looking to purchase the book. They can go to stpetersburgpress.com. And I believe it's also on Amazon. Is that correct?
I don't think so. You can buy it at Tombolo Books. And I'd also like to state that proceeds go to the St. Petersburg's, the African American Heritage Association of St. Petersburg. So it's for a good cause that you buy the book.
Fantastic. Yeah, and it sounds like a great read. So go out and get that book. I'm definitely going to go to the website and check out the other proposals. It's an exciting time in St. Petersburg. So thank you so much, Sarah Jane.
Thank you for having me.